All right, now we will talk about soul theory. And this is one of the major theories on personal identity, and it's a very traditional theory and often associated as with religion as a religious theory, but not necessarily. Aristotle believed in the soul, and he wasn't necessarily religious, although he did believe in some sort of deity. Plato believed in a soul. Socrates believed in a soul, and those are the three, major Greek philosophers. So the soul theory is that you survive if and only if your soul survives. And this is actually a simplification because there are various takes on the soul theory and what are your conditions for survival. So we're going to just keep things simple and say you survive if and only if your soul survives. So wherever your soul goes, you go. Wherever you go, your soul goes. So you're inseparable from your soul. Why? Well, some people say that you are your soul. Others say that you have your soul as a sort of essential part, that you couldn't exist without it, right? So some proponents, you have Plato, Rene Descartes. I would add in Thomas Aquinas, who comes between Plato and Descartes, Richard Swinburne, and Alvin Plantinga. And there are many more, of course. These are just some samples. And as you can see, Swinburne and Plantinga are still living. So what would the soul theory, my question to you, see if you can understand what's going on, or even if the soul theory makes sense as a theory. What would the soul theory say about the various cases from part one, personal identity lecture part one, the amnesia case, the fetus case, the transplant case, and the teletransportation case? Well, let's walk through the cases one by one. If you lose your memory, even your psychology, it's not necessarily the case that you lose your soul. In fact, many philosophers think that the soul is the animator of the body. So if your body is still breathing, if your body is still engaging in various sort of functions like metabolism, respiration, circulation, those sorts of things, it's clear if in fact you do have a soul and it animates your body, that your soul is still there. So even if you lose your personality and memories and things like that, you still have a soul in there animating your body. I mean, otherwise, your body would be living without a soul, or maybe with a different soul, and then you would no longer exist. So if your body could somehow survive without a soul, well, on soul theory, that wouldn't be you, that would be just your body. Or if when you lose your memories and personality and other aspects of your psychology, you lose your soul, and yet there's a different soul to replace it, well, then that wouldn't be you. Maybe it would be a lesser soul, not a human soul, because the personality is gone. It would be maybe an animal soul or something like that. So that's amnesia. What about fetus? Clearly, there are points in your fetal development where you don't have a brain. However, it's not so clear whether you have a soul at that point, just according to the theory, right? I mean, lots of religious people who believe in the soul think that you have your soul from conception, and maybe God creates your soul, or maybe your soul is just created through the process of reproduction. So I don't know. I don't know that I can give a definitive. Actually, I can't give a definitive answer here when it comes to whether you've had a soul as a fetus without a brain. But I think maybe the common answer for a soul theorist is, at least the religious ones, which tends to be quite a few of the soul theorists, that you had your soul from conception. And that's actually a natural, starting point for the soul. When the sperm and the egg come together, you have a new biological organism. Why not start the soul there? And then why is it that you're not conscious at that point? Well, the soul works through the brain, and the brain is not yet developed. Yeah, something like that. So let's leave the fetus case open for various interpretations. All right, the transplant case. So this is where your brain is moved from one body to another, and interestingly, it's not so clear either what happens to your soul. Now, many people say your soul is responsible for your personality, your memories, and things like that. So if your brain moves, presumably, the brain in the new body, that person wakes up and starts acting and talking like you. Your brain is moved, put into a new body, and the person that results, the new body, old brain, that person gets up and says, hey, what the heck? How did I get into a new body? This is Keith Hess. Where am I? Right? Okay, so for those who think that the soul is responsible for the personality, the most natural thing to say here is that your soul went along with your brain, so to speak. But maybe your soul stays behind, right? In the living, breathing, brainless animal or human being without a cerebrum that's sitting on the hospital bed. Because if the soul animates the body, there's presumably a soul here because there's the brain stem and the body is still metabolizing, digesting. There's still some avoidance behavior when you prick the person or the body, maybe. So maybe there's a soul there. Again, with the transplant case, I don't think there's a definitive answer, and I think part of the issue is you can't clearly, observe a soul. You can only observe its effects. I guess you can have like Miller said in the dialogue, you can have a direct experience of your soul, and that to me seems right. But anyway, you can only observe someone else's soul through the effects of the soul. So there are certain cases where it's unclear what happens. And then the teletransportation case. Here's where your body is destroyed at some other location. A new body is constructed that looks like your body. The person who results has the same personality and memories as you, same desires. Now, again, it's not clear what the soul theorist would say. And a lot of these cases just depend on the details of the particular soul theory, right? Because there are many soul theorists with different ideas about what having a soul involves. And so I think to be fair, we would need to ask, we would need to go into the details of the particular theories to really wonder or get to know what the results of the theory are. So you survive if and only if your soul survives, fair enough. But, I think to give answers to each of these cases, we need to have a more robust theory. And they're out there, Alvin Planning, S. Swinburne. They each have more robust theories of the soul, and other soul proponents do as well. So let's look at an argument against soul theory that was found in a dialogue concerning personal identity and immortality. Let me just read it off to you. Number 1, identity of persons consists in identity of souls. If identity of persons consists in identity of souls, then judgments about persons are groundless and without foundations. Our judgments about persons are not groundless and without foundation. Therefore, identity of persons does not consist in identity of souls. Again, there's a typo. Premise 1 should have the word if at the beginning. So this follows a valid argument form, meaning that the conclusion follows from the premises, called modus tollens. And the form is this: if A, then B, not B, therefore not A. Not A follows from the premises. If A, then B, and not B. So what you have here is the conclusion: identity of persons does not consist in identity of souls, following from the first two premises. And if both premises are true, then now we have a problem for the soul theory. Because supposing that one is true, then whenever we make a judgment about persons, we're making a judgment about souls, and yet judgments about souls are groundless and without foundation, because have you ever seen a soul? But our judgments about persons are not groundless and without foundation. I can say, hey, there's Sally. I just saw her the other day, and I'm confident that that's Sally. That's not groundless and without foundation. Sally has the same body, same personality. She says, oh, I remember talking to you, that sort of thing. And therefore, if we're making judgments about souls, and yet those judgments are groundless and without foundation, then identity of persons does not consist in identity of souls. So when you say, that's the same person I saw yesterday, according to soul theory, that judgment is true. It's only true if the person from yesterday and the person seen now have the same soul. But how do you know they have the same soul, right? Like, you see this same body or same body with the same personality, but you've never seen the soul. And, why Rob in the dialogue, she gives the example of biting into a piece of chocolate. And you can tell what sort of center the chocolate has based on your past experience of the outside of the chocolate. But then Miller says, hey, the reason you know what center there is because you have experience of the center as well as the outside, and you make that correlation. However, when it comes to the soul, you never actually observe the soul to make the correlation between body and soul or psychology and soul, right? So the problem is we can't perceive the soul either directly or indirectly. Directly, we've never observed the soul, and indirectly, the principle same body, same soul, and even same psychology, same soul, can't be tested because we can't see the soul to establish the correlation between body and soul or psychology and soul. All right. So the point is, since we rightly or correctly make judgments about sameness of persons over time, and we do this all the time, then identity of persons cannot consist in identity of souls. So says Y. Rob from A Dialogue Concerning Personal Identity and Immortality. How might the soul theorist respond? Here's a way. I'm not saying this is how the soul theorist should respond. This is just sort of a way I came up with that I think they might respond. I think maybe it's a good response. So here's the thing. Our judgments about persons, they're not based on souls, since souls aren't observable. At least the soul of another person, although I might be able to observe my soul directly. Rather, our judgments about persons, clearly they're based on same body, same psychology. So here I'm actually going with the argument and its line of thinking. But here's the thing. Just because our judgments about persons are not based on souls, that doesn't rule out the soul theory, right? Because perhaps the soul grounds our personal identity, whereas our judgments are not based on souls. So the soul is what maintains our existence and our identity over time, but our judgments are not based on souls. Our judgments are based on other factors like body and psychology. So we track people over time, which is an epistemic notion, via their body and their psychology. But what grounds their identity over time, what makes it the case that they continue to exist, is their soul. So the judgment about someone's identity over time is different from the metaphysics of their identity over time. So in other words, we don't identify or recognize people by their soul, but sameness of soul might still be what makes it true that one person is identical to another. So personally, I don't think this argument holds any water in terms of this argument against the soul here. I don't think it holds any water. I think it's mistaking some epistemic notions with some metaphysical notions. Epistemically, we judge people based on body and psychology. Metaphysically, according to soul theory at least, our identity over time is secured by our soul. Okay, so here's another way to put the reply. We distinguished between two questions of personal identity in the first lecture, right? Personal identity part 1. How do we find out who is who? That's one question. What does it take for persons to persist from one time to another? That's another question. The first question is an epistemic question, a question of evidence. The second question is a metaphysical question, a question of being. The first question is answered according to body and psychology. The second question, according to soul theorists, is answered by the soul. And that's consistent for us to identify people by their body and psychology, but for their soul to ground their identity. Okay, now we might ask, because it's kind of part of the point of the dialogue about life after death, we want to know, is life after death possible on soul theory? I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. Now, I think pretty clearly, yes, it's possible. All we're talking about is a logical possibility. And traditionally, the soul can survive without the body. So if your body dies, your body's in the ground, your body's decomposed. That doesn't mean your soul has ceased to exist. Who knows where your soul is? I mean, maybe it's in heaven. Maybe, there's reincarnation or something like that. But just because your body dies, it doesn't mean your soul ceases to exist. And since it's your soul that grounds your identity, if your soul continues to exist after you die, then you continue to exist after you die. And clearly, life after death is possible on this theory. All right, so that's what we have for soul theory. We're going to move on to psychological continuity theory.